Welcome to the Women in AV podcast. My name is Erica Carroll, and today is a special edition of the show. Joining me today is longtime AVNation panelist, Bren Walker, formerly with Kierkegaard and the founder of Listen for Peace, which is an exciting new endeavor that she's working with. Hello, Bren.
Hi, Erica. Thank you so much for having me and for entertaining my idea to do this.
Absolutely.
Listen for Peace is just something I'm doing as a answer to what's going on in our world with war and conflict. The site will be up by the time this goes, the recording is live. In case anybody wants to join me from wherever they are to spend 5 minutes listening for peace. So sound is everything in my life, has been since I was a little kid. So everything, I usually put everything in the context of what am I listening to? What does the world sound like around me? And I have to say that I was completely stunned and moved and excited when I heard Sam give a talk last year at the University of Victoria, had a conference on music production research. And it was one of those moments where someone was saying the things I had experienced my entire career, and they'd never quite been articulated the way that Sam articulated them. So for everybody joining us, Samantha Bennett is a professor of music and associate dean of higher degree research at the Australian National University and chair of the International Association for the Study of Popular Music. Her research is around music, science, and technology. Her work around gear and gear culture and secrecy was what just turned me on. And I am so excited by the work that she's doing. And I just want everyone who has hesitation about technical role in any field. Audio is what we're talking about, but if you have any hesitation in a technical field, read her work and it will demystify things for you, and I think empower you to embrace the field. So, and to take some chances, because a lot of people holding the secrets, they don't really have any secrets. But Sam, thank you for joining us early in the morning for you. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Bren. It was wonderful to meet you in Victoria, and thank you, Erica. It's lovely to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. If you don't mind, Bren and I talked for just a moment, and is it okay if I kick off with my question of, I'd love to know. So I started reading Gear because Bren brought this up to me, and I thought it phenomenal book, very inspiring in the way of reading things that I have felt for so many years. And I just want to know what led to your research for all of this in the first place.
Yeah, thanks so much for your question. First of all, I need to clarify that the book is co-authored between myself and Elliot Bates, who is Associate Professor of Ethnomusicology and Head of Ethnomusicology at CUNY Graduate Center in New York. And we've been working together for a long time. We met 18 years ago now, which makes me feel old, probably makes us both feel old. But it came off the back of another book that we had co-edited together called Critical Approaches to the Production of Music and Sound. And that came out with Bloomsbury Academic in 2017, late 2017 or 2018. And that was a collection of chapters that we had gathered from colleagues who working in the field who we really respect. And we put that together to try to offer new perspectives on sound, on music, on technology, on production, and so on and so forth. So we really enjoyed working on that together, but then we realized we had a lot more to say. And our previous individual work, so for Elliot, that was looking at recording studio praxis in Turkey and digital audio workstations, and that's all in their book, Digital Tradition. And I had written a book called Modern Records, Maverick Methods, which was all about technology and process in 80s and 90s Western pop music record production. And we had both been analysing what the technology does, what sound recorders do with the technologies, and then how that manifests in recorded music. And what we realised at the end of Critical Approaches was that music technology and audio technology just seemed to be so loaded with so much excessive stuff that had nothing to do with how it sounded. So we thought, what about if we wrote a book on music technology that has nothing to do with how it sounds and everything to do with the excesses of it and how it becomes sort of, constitutive of social relations and power struggles and how all these kind of gendered and racialized kind of ideas get imbued into it. And that's kind of really weird thing to want to do. But Elliot and I are quite strange people. And Bren just said that she got turned on by gear. Well, we did too. So join the club. And so that's how the book came about. So that was quite a long description, but it was quite a long trajectory that got us there.
Well, how did you end up coming to audio as a field? Like, how did you end up being in the engineer's seat?
That's a great question. I ended up in the engineer's seat because I really did not like being in the musician's seat in the recording studio. Oh. So I started off playing guitar and being in bands in my late teens, and started doing some recording around the time that I was 20. And I think the turning point was recording an EP. It was late 90s, early 2000s. And I was just really struggling I was singing and I was playing guitar, but I wasn't enjoying it. Every time I heard something back, it was just like, I was crying. I was like, I can't get this part down. Why is it so easy in rehearsal? Why is it not coming together when I'm in this high pressured environment? And then it just sort of suddenly clicked that the only person actually having a really good time was the recording engineer. And I was like, hold on a minute. I'm like falling apart and having a nervous breakdown here. And this guy's like, he's just going, yep, and again. And I'm like, this is way better. Mm-hmm. Because it's just like no pressure. You're just like hitting a button and going, yeah, I think you've got a better take in you than that. And so basically I got really inspired by the potential of sound and what sound could do and how the studio, as what Brian Eno called that compositional tool, could work to, change sound, and that was just as important as the music that you were recording, and the potential of the studio and the technologies within it, how you position microphones, the signal flow, how whatever preamps you're going through, how that will affect. And so I did sound recording and music technology at Westminster College in London. That was in the late 90s, and then by that point I was simultaneously working in studios in London, and then I joined the Music Producers Guild, and that was all I wanted to do in my early to mid 20s, was just record and produce music. And I was doing really kind of low level stuff back then in studios. I was the tea person. I was trying to get MIDI into Logic Silver at the time, when it was eMagic. I know we're going back, I'm showing my age,
Wow.
And trying to, and I remember when another 256 meg of RAM turned up for this Apple we had, and it was like, this is going to change our lives. Yeah, so I was, I remember soldering, SM58s, like those, when you keep pulling the XLR out, and you plug it in, you pull it out, and you plug it in, and you do that 20 times a day, and that little screw in the end of them goes, well,
Oh, yeah.
then all of a sudden the socket comes out with it, and you've got like a bunch of wires sticking out. I remember soldering SM58s and, just things like that, rolling cable,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
maybe sitting in the chair for an hour if the main engineer went out for lunch or something. But yeah, I was more assistant engineering at that time. But it was at that point where I thought my future is in sound recording, audio engineering, music technology.
And then what was your transition to academia? And are you still doing any recording work now?
Yeah, it's a complete accident. I mean, I would never have thought I ended up in academia, and that was not my intention, even in my mid to late 20s. So I ended up, I finished my my college level qualifications in audio and music tech, and then I did a master's degree in audio production at Westminster University. And I ended up working there. Well, I ended up working at Westminster College first in sound and music tech. My former lecturer invited me back there to do some hourly paid stuff. So I was still working in studios, but then once a week I'd go back to the college and just help in that 3-hour sound practice slot they had in the afternoon, where students were just, they had like 12 different sound engineering practicals they had to complete, and one was on preamps, and one was on de-essing, and one was on, mid-side technique with and all of these different things, and I was kind of basically supervising that, and that just built up. 1 year I was doing hourly paid, the next year I was part-time, the next year I was like 0.8. The following year, Westminster University poached me, and then all of a sudden I was working in a university. The biggest transformation for me, the life-changing moment, and I can pinpoint it, was the 2005 Art of Record Production Conference. And that happened to be at Westminster University. So that was going back 21 years ago now. Simon Zagorski-Thomas hosted that. It was him and Alan Fisher's idea. Alan was the head of the MA audio production at Westminster Uni at the time. And I was a master's student, and I attended that. And I remember just listening to so many different presentations, like Paul Thaberge was there, Alex Reed was there from Ithaca College in Florida. Like they were, and I just remember being blown away. I was like, what? You can stand up there and analyze recorded music, or you can talk about production in this really detailed way. And then I watched a presentation by Alan Moore, who at that time was a professor of music at Surrey University in that music and sound recording department, which is really quite famous. And he was pulling apart a Beach Boys record and talking about the spatial positioning and the frequency content and stuff. And I was looking at my friend going like, oh yeah, but it's that and it's that. And no, actually that symbol is over there on the right side. And, well, you can hear that, because I knew all this because I've been audio engineering for years by that point, and the questions came and the hand went up. And what I noticed in that forum was that most people I was speaking to kept talking about this thing called a PhD. Like I was talking to Alex, and he was like, oh yeah, I'm just finishing my PhD. And I'm like, what are they talking about? I didn't know what a PhD was. I knew what a master's was, but I didn't know what a PhD was. And I was like, this seems like something that people are doing. And then after that conference, I know, really naive. And then after that conference, I started researching a lot more about Alan Moore's work. And that tied in with the final project I had to do for my MA. And And then I got in touch with Alan and I said, I want to do a PhD. I'd like for you to supervise it. He said yes. And that was the beginning of it all. So that was, by that point, that was about 2006, 2007. Yeah. So again, going back 20 years now. So a long time ago, but very, very fond memories of studying with Alan at Surrey. I was so, so lucky to find him because academia was not my world. I grew up in a working class family. I had no access to all of that. The academy, what's that? You know, I was very much focused on music, audio, music production. And, you know, so academia was kind of alien to me. And Alan, you know, basically helped me walk that path. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.
In that time, there really weren't women in that field. Was there anybody that you looked up to in that space, or were you really just forging your own path?
I really was trying to forge my own path. There were people I looked up to, certainly in music, certainly musicians, so many, I mean, countless women guitarists, particularly, you know. As I played guitar and still do. And I was in bands for a long time. So I loved, you know, any female guitarist. You know, I mean, I guess one of the only women that I did look up to from an audio perspective was Sylvia Massey at that time.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I didn't really know that many women audio engineers at all. There was myself and a Spanish woman on our master's course, and the two of us were the only women on that course at the time. And, you know, as a lot of women describe, that's a difficult scenario to be in. And when you're also smashing it, which I was, and handing in the work and standing up and playing back your recordings, and they sound great and they sound better than a lot of the guys there, that intimidates them. And then they start, you know.
Yeah.
And then that leads to, you know, targeted behavior. I mean, that's like the story of my life. Like it honestly is. And I'm sure that you've experienced it too. I think things are slightly improved nowadays, but I still think it's really, really challenging for women, non-binary people, gender diverse people to work in these industries. I really do.
Yeah, I think that the whole idea of you are a part of a gang of people who are all into audio together. And a lot of, for my experience, was that the guys came up with this sort of crew and they had their way of talking about it. And if you pop that bubble for them, you're persona non grata. You're the person that they're going to come after, because they're the imposter syndrome that's happening behind a lot of what they're doing and saying is something that they're not prepared to have the curtain pulled back on. But they have those same doubts, the same questions of, you know, hearing a technical thing and not knowing what that is, but being too afraid to ask, right? Where I found that I would just sort of play what people would call Columbo. My dad used to call play Columbo, and just act like you don't know anything and just ask lots of questions. And then no one's going to be measuring you as much. But
that's right.
But it's the idea that there's a this sort of secret group and the codes around gear. Are you finding that, is it more or less in academia than it was on the professional studio side?
I think it's both. So with the gear book, like the main thesis in that book, as you both know, is that gear has got nothing to do with how it sounds, and it's everything to do with how it doesn't sound. And actually, the two main themes that are that come through when people engage with gear and when they buy and sell gear and when it's discoursed is war and sex. And both of those things appeal to a predominantly male audience, and a kind of a masculinity that is that's completely hegemonic within the audio and music technology industries. And that is buoyed by, Bren, what you were just talking about, which is performed connoisseurship. So that what becomes important is not I'm working in a studio and tomorrow we start an album recording, or we start recording a song for this particular performer or group of musicians. That's not what's important. What's important in that group is, the Fairchild 670, don't you know, was the cutting limiter that the Beatles used at Abbey Road, and it's blah, 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 and it's a very Mew. It's actually a very Mew. That is what becomes important, is the performance of knowledge about the gear, about what it stands for, what it means, and so that is what is happening in these scenarios, whether they are within the industry and you just happen to be with a group of guys, I don't know, at an AES convention or something like that, or at a music production conference, or sadly, it happens in pedagogical scenarios. And this is why women and gender diverse people feel excluded from that, because the whole music technology industry has been built around that whole performance of masculinity and performance of connoisseurship. And of course, that whole language then becomes alien to us. It's like, what do you want about? I want to record that vocal. It doesn't land because it's not intended for us. And that's where that kind of reinforcement of exclusion happens. And so, that was the main thesis in the gear book. I followed that up. So the keynote that I gave that you were talking about, Bren, at the Victoria, is actually another book, which is called Secrets and Revelation in Music and Audio Technology Cultures. And that is out either later this month or early May with Cambridge University Press. And I sole authored that because in the gear book, we had a chapter that was just on secrets and what secrets do, and how secrets work to sort of uphold these exclusionary issues in music and audio tech. I sent this book off, and when I got the reviews back, one of them was somebody from industry and said, I feel like so much has been exposed in this book, and actually in my own work and what I'm doing and how I'm talking about it. And it's actually really confronting. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, if I'm doing a job where I'm showing this up and I'm just basically drilling right down into the heart of the issues as to why we are finding these environments uncomfortable and how men can perpetuate that and make things uncomfortable without even realizing that they're doing it, because I don't know if you've noticed this. I'd be interested to hear from you both, but a lot of men, when you talk to them about behavior in a studio or in a industry setting, they say, oh, well, I've never behaved like, I'm the not all men. I've got a woman friend who I speak to about, oh, she's really good at engineering. I haven't said anything, really inappropriate. And it's like, you don't have to be, this isn't a blatant thing. This is an insidious thing. Yeah. This is something that, you don't have to come out and blatantly make comments about how somebody looks or say something sexually inappropriate or harass somebody openly. This is about the day-to-day codes, as you said, Bren, that ensure that space stays masculine.
Yeah, I'm thinking about an experience I had at one of the conferences, lots of gear on display. A major console manufacturer was introducing a new product. I went to the booth. I had clients who I was ready, designs. I'm wanting to put these consoles and these designs, and none of them would talk to me. Like they literally just kept looking past me. And a designer who worked for me at the time, male, of course, went up and immediately they started talking to him and explaining the product to him and everything. And I just sort of watched the whole thing. And then I kind of walked up next to him and they started asking him about, you know, what are the projects and what are the budgets? And he just said, you have to ask her. She's my boss. And the guy's face just fell. And he was like, you were just here. I was like, yeah, I was. And none of you would talk to me. And he was like, well, I just figured you were an assistant or something. And it wasn't like he wasn't being mean or rude or anything. It was just the assumption that this woman couldn't possibly know anything about the console or be responsible for the decision about spending the money on it. And my view on those things is I'm very confrontational about it, but I try not to be aggressive. I'm assertive in my in confronting people on it and just helping them see that the whole concept, if you're a fish, do you know what the water is if you've never been outside of it? Right. And for a lot of these men, they've never been outside of the conversation that they have with the dudes that they see every year at the conference and the thing. Absolutely. And the going to play the golf and drink the beer and all of it. Right.
And it's a naturalized and normalized environment for them to be in.
Yes.
And I mean, getting back to what you were saying, Bren, and I empathize profoundly with your experience there. Elliot and I, even when we were doing the ethnographic work for the gear book, and we were at NAMM and we were at AES conventions, and we were going up to people in booths wanting to interview them, 9 times out of 10, they were focused on Elliot and not me. I think one of the most challenging things for me has been that one of the things that I'm most proud of in my career was building and completely refurbishing the School of Music recording studios, which I did in 2017 after a huge effort. It took me 2.5 years to basically persuade the university to give me the money to make sure that we had this world-class recording studio. And I put 48 channels of Neve in there, and I put all the usual gear in there, and it's got the LA2A, and it's got the pool tech, and it's got the, you know, distressors, and it's got all of that stuff, right? And a microphone collection that's just off the charts, right? And I had the whole lot acoustically treated, and it's beautiful, and the students love it. And the politics of that space, it never ceases to amaze me. We are now 9 years on from that studio being built. I have read articles in the local press that attribute the building and the vision of that studio to 3 different male heads of school. I've been walking around the building with the technical manager and visitors, and them only speaking to the technical manager about the studio and not me. And the tech manager, Matt Barnes, who is phenomenal and is my right arm and has been, and actually his PhD is now sort of focused on some of these kind of gender politics, because the amount of times we've been situation. People have asked him things, and he's gone, you'll have to ask Sam. You'll have to ask Sam. It was actually Sam that built it. Can you just like talk to her about it? You know, and so that's happened. I've had colleagues stand outside my office, just basically expressing how they would have spent the money on other things and not the recording studio, and all of this professional jealousy coming through.
Yeah.
So the fact that it was me, that it was my idea, I worked with the acoustician, I worked with the sound guys to make sure that it was wired. I chose the desk configuration with AMS Neve. I went to Burnley. You know, I was like, I was the person who did all of this. But even 9 years later, that's still this big political thing. And it's just like, at the time, it was kind of exhausting for me, and I would get quite upset about it, sort of 2015, 2016. It's like, God, you know, why is this such a problem? But now I just laugh.
Exactly.
Because it's like, really? We're still here, guys. You know, you still got a problem with this space, and the students love it. And, you know, anyway, it's because the very idea of a woman in that space, affiliated to that space, let alone working in that space, that is deeply political.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And people might think, oh, no, it's not. There's loads of women in audio. No, it is still deeply political. And it comes through in all of these really bizarre ways. But yeah, it ties in with your experience, Bren, and the assumption women shouldn't be in these spaces. They're not in these spaces, or if they are, they're the partners of the men in the spaces, or they're secretaries, or they're, you know, in an administrative or promotional role. You know,
I'm reminded of a project that I worked on right around that same time, major U.S. university, and the professor who was the head of recording, it's a Neve studio, and he basically put together his wish list of what he wanted, and he got everything, and no one asked him any questions. It was just approved. And and I think about the women I knew who were teaching similar things, and how they had to fight to get any one little extra thing, and no one questioned any part of what he wanted. And he was even shocked. You know, he expected that somehow there'd be some trim to it or whatever. And he's like, I have more gear than I can fit in the room, because I didn't actually think I would get everything, you know?
Yeah.
But the assumption was there that if he's asking, he must know, right? But if it's a woman asking, does she really know? You know, is she really being careful? You know, that sort of thing. So personally, I just sort of I believe that not to shrink back, that we take up all our space and we tell our own stories, and we tell what we've done, and tell it proudly, because
you have to stand up.
You do, and recognize that someone else isn't going to tell the story for you. Right. And if they do tell it, they may not tell it in the way they're going to tell it from their frame, as opposed to you telling the story from your frame and being proud of the work that you've done and the knowledge that you have. And, you know, don't worry for the women out there who are concerned about perceptions and things. Don't worry, you know, because at the end of the day, you can only be yourself.
That's right.
Any other choice is going to cost you at some point. And it costs you in ways that you won't be happy with, and that people outside externally won't know about, won't care. So step into all of it, I say, for all those, anybody who's joining us, who's listening, watching this, please just step into all of it.
Unfortunately, I do think that these topics come up all too often. I empathize with both of your experiences, and I know that I have shared experiences, not in audio world, but definitely having to prove myself in the AV world and my technical chops. But looking forward, I mean, we hear these stories so often. How can we be better? What? How do we course correct?
Well, I'll just say I think that reading Sam's book about secrets is a great first start. And to be
Mm-hmm.
aware of what your cultural environment is and to speak out when it's happening, right? And also to turn to the men in your environment and say, I can't do this by myself. I need
Mm-hmm.
allies who understand what's happening, who will listen to what I'm saying about this, and who will join me in calling it out in the moment. Because a lot of times, the people who are perpetrating need to hear it from someone who looks like them in order
Mm-hmm.
to have the light go off and change their behavior.
I think men
Mm-hmm.
backing women is absolutely critical,
Mm-hmm.
because when I think of my career, even in when I was working in recording studios, and the two main engineers that I worked for, and both of whom had a string of really, really impressive credits to their name, and both of them backed me. And had they not backed me, I would have been out of there. I wouldn't have survived 5 minutes. When I think about my PhD, and Alan Moore really backed me, or I remember I did a lot of work for an organization called James, the Joint Audio Media Education Services. And there was a lot of guys in that forum who'd worked in EMI for EMI back in the day. So people like Dave Harries and Melvin Toms, both of whom worked at Abbey Road and Air Studios in maintenance. And they were always super supportive. Phil Harding, who was the chair, who was one of Stock Aitken and Waterman's engineers in the late 80s and in the 90s, these guys were super supportive and real allies. And when I look back, I just think I'm really, really lucky, because had I not had those sorts of really strong and respected male figures sort of supporting me. I mean, I remember when I was building the recording studio and I started to lose a bit of confidence, and I rang up Dave Harries, and he came with me to visit Neve and help me with a lot of the studio design. And I was like, what about this? What about that? And he was like, you don't need me. You know this. You've got this.
Yeah.
Like you're
That's great.
you're you're ringing me up and you're asking me stuff. You already know this, Sam. And I was like, wow, this is somebody who was who, I mean, he's overseen the development of British Grove Studios and Mark Knopfler's studios in Ravenscroft Park in London. He's an EMI person, and that really, it felt validating. Not that I really needed that, but in some ways, maybe I did. My confidence was not 100% there. Even I did have the knowledge, but it was as if I needed somebody to say that, But as I said, I've been incredibly fortunate that I've had people like that to be so supportive.
Well, and I think that's why your work on secrets is so important, because for anyone who feels like they're on the outside, if this idea of the secret starts to get demystified, then it's easier to talk to people, and it's actually easier to ask people to mentor you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And because then you can actually start to cut through who is really relying on this stuff versus the people who they know their stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And they don't need to play the gear games. They don't need to play the secret things. They don't need to order outboard gear that they never use in a session because someone said you should have that on the list, kind of stuff. They know what they're actually doing. And the more I think women understand and non-binary people understand the sort of way that the secrets can be used, where they turn up, how to spot them, and then start to really diffuse them, that's our best path towards helping everybody be equal in one collective, right?
It's the demystification of it, and that's why
Yes.
the book begins with a quote from James Henry, who was a Californian engineer and pedagogue who's sadly no longer with us. And he spoke on the African Americans in audio panel at AES it was 2017, I think. And he was so frustrated about it all. He was like, it's not Hogwarts. It isn't a big secret. Signal flow is not it's not something that's just this magic. It can be explained. It's just that, it's within the interests of a masculine hegemony to keep it secret, to guard that knowledge, because then it becomes a power relation, doesn't it? It's like, well, I've got it, you haven't. I could reveal the secret to whatever it is. And in the book, I talk about how, because sound is invisible, unless you're looking at an oscilloscope or a door or something, it is so conducive to this discourse. It just fits perfectly. Of course it can be analogized through magic and, secret ingredients and secret weapons and secret locations and all of this stuff, because we can't see it. So that's why it lends itself so well to these kinds of discourses, but they do exclude and they are really problematic. And at the end, I talk about ways in which we can dismantle that, which is what I try and focus on doing.
It's amazing. Sam, I want to thank you so much for sharing your stories on this episode of the Women of AV podcast. It's been such a pleasure having you on and sharing your insights and your experiences. Where in the world might people find you? Either websites or how can people reach out to you?
I'm easily findable online. You can find me through the Australian National University website, academia.edu. I've got a page there with my work on. If anybody would like copies of anything, please ask me. I don't like paywalls and I often send out things that people are looking for. So,
That's
Samantha.Bennett at anu.edu.au is my email address.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Bren, thank you so much for being the curator of this conversation and bringing it to light. We appreciate you. Where can people find you?
You'll find me on LinkedIn occasionally, but with the hacking going on there, less and less, I got to say. But the best way really to reach me will be to email Bren at listenforpeace.com. So I'm still working on a couple of projects at Kierkegaard, a few projects that I'm designing that don't start construction for another 3 years. But Listen for Peace is what I'm going to be focused on, at least until some of our conditions change in the world. So,
of course, that project is also incredibly inspiring. Thank you for taking a few moments to talk with me about it beforehand. We should have you back on to talk about Listen for Peace, because I think it's worth talking about.
I would love to. And I'll have some stories to tell by then, I'm sure. Right. Of just what people have to say about what's going on right now. And I just to add, the component of Sam's work around audio and gear and war, I think is important for people who work in this field to understand where our stuff came from. If you don't have a historical grounding in how our gear came to be what it is, called what it is, marketed in some cases the way it is, it's worth knowing. And I think as an industry, it's worth it for us to start thinking about how we demilitarize audio. Really.
Yeah.
There's no reason for us to hold on to those old relics anymore. So.
You can find me in all the social places with the handle at the Erica Carroll. Thank you again to everyone and to our listeners and our viewers. As always, if you're listening to this as an audio only, please be sure to check it out on YouTube and vice versa. If you are watching this on YouTube, you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. And remember to check out some of our other AVNation shows, like our friends over at State of Control on avnation.tv.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AV Nation.
This is AV Nation.